The most important thing about telling a story, first off, is just tell it. Don't worry about whether it's any good. My grandmother was not a particularly great storyteller, but she could tell you about the night my father was conceived. In fact, my grandmother would tell you about the night my father was conceived really at the drop of a hat. Well, actually, it's more like a couple vodkas, and then it was, "Did I ever tell you about the night your father was conceived?" No, please don't. Best screwing I ever had. Ah! I learned so much from my grandmother. And not only about the night my father was conceived, but I learned that her life, I learned about what it was like to be a flapper in the 20s. I tell you what, you can go to a textbook and read all about Prohibition. Or you can hear the story of my grandmother, telling me what it was like to stand on top of a piano, in a speakeasy, singing and having men surrounding her and smoking at it with a cigarette holder. I can see the 1920s through story in a way that a book filled with facts will never be able to communicate. So some storytelling tricks. First of all, remember you don't have to start your story from square one. So if it's about the day something really cool happened, don't start your story with the alarm clock going off. Go in 2 or 3 pages and see at what moment does the first interesting thing happen. It is always better to show things than to tell them. That's one of the oldest suggestions that you can get in storytelling. Show, don't tell. You present characters. You describe the characters. You give them dialogue. You let people see a scene as it's happening. Telling means it's a narrative voice saying, this happened, then that happened, then that happened, then that happened. Exposition is the basic facts needed to explain your story. Exposition is better off when you kind of infer it rather than declare it. I always like to use the example of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. What do you know about Dorothy? She's an orphan. That's never said, but you know that, and you know she's an orphan because she lives with who? Uncle Henry and Annie. Let's say you're writing a story. You write your story out on paper. If you can, just the first time through, just get it out on paper. That's the important thing, because it's always hard to go from, it's hardest to go from nothing to something. I used to imagine an owl sitting on my shoulder, as I'm typing, saying, "What you're writing sucks. Your writing isn't very good. You didn't choose the right word there." And during a first draft, I'm like, "Shh, I'm working." Now, once you get your first draft down, then you can go back and say, okay, now what were all those criticisms again? Usually the story of a hero's journey is the story of someone learning how to become themselves. Characters usually thrown into a conflict because of something that throws their life out of whack. And what they then have to do is learn something. And when you attain that moment of illumination, when you learn how to use the Force, when you slay Darth Vader, when you face up to the Red Queen down the rabbit hole, you reach a moment where you find your courage. You find your truth. And then, in the final act, you can become yourself.